KDKR Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, KYJC Commerce, KMWC Bethany. Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, what can consumers expect in 2025 when it comes to credit? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, in regards to credit in 2025, what do the trends look like? Charlie Wise is here today to go over the latest from TransUnion. Hey, Charlie, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Bob. Great to be with you.
You know, it's great to have y'all come on the program because this is unlike any type of consumer survey that we get lots of that deal with 1,000 people here, 5,000 people here, and then they translate that into the 300 plus million of people on the country. You know, y'all are one of the big three credit reporting agencies, and you've got all the data. So talk a little bit about how you use that data to really dig in and see what's going on with the consumer.
Sure, and you're exactly right. We sit on top of the data of virtually every credit-active consumer in the United States. So we see all the credit cards, all the auto loans, all the mortgages, and we have a really good sense of how the consumer is behaving, performing, and trying to figure out how they're feeling. So when we look at the data through this past year, it comes on the heels of, I'll call it a pretty unusual, maybe even a little scary couple of years. We saw a huge ramp up in consumers using credit, not necessarily to buy homes and automobiles, which they have for many years, but really to help make ends meet. And the driving factor behind that has been this runaway inflation that we saw for a number of years that was putting a big pinch on consumers' wallets. And when they didn't have enough to make ends meet after they're done paying for their higher rent and their higher groceries and their higher daycare and, you name it, they were turning to credit, and particularly credit cards, to help make ends meet. So we've seen an enormous ramp up in borrowing on credit cards and really to kind of fuel, again, that just making ends meet every day. So when we look at the data, when we look to try to understand where are we heading going into 2025, we actually see what I'll call a pretty encouraging story, which is we expect, and based on our forecasts, and we're pretty good at doing it, we see that this growth in consumer credit is going to slow quite a bit. And we think there's some good trends that are helping consumers as we go into this new year.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because if you look at this level of stabilization that you're seeing occur, and then you look at that, without inflation, we're at an all-time high with credit card debt. With inflation, we're still behind the 2008 era. You wonder how. I mean, you've got all this credit card debt at these very high interest rates. How could that stay in a stabilizing form?
So, what we expect is that the growth in credit card balances. That we're going to end up the year up a little bit from where we were at the end of 2023. We expect to see balances overall on credit cards up maybe 3-4%, but that's down a lot from the 15 to 20% growth that we saw in 2022 and 2023. And then that to continue to be at a much more moderate pace, like 3 to 4% in 2025. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there was so much change so quickly in the last several years, and I'm particularly talking about inflation and consumers having to learn how to make do when things were so much more expensive, and there was a lot of that uncertainty that it was causing in consumers' wallets. How am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to, keep the gas tank full and pay for, someone to watch out for my kids so, I can go to my job during the day? And what tends to happen is that as things start to stabilize, prices are still high, but inflation is slowing down. But what we're seeing is that more and more consumers are figuring things out. They're figuring out how to make their budgets work. They're figuring out, okay, if this is what I got to pay in rent and this is what I got to pay in groceries, and I used to pay $150 a month and now it's $250. Well, you know what? I'll figure that out. Maybe I'll find a place to shop that's got a bit better prices. Maybe I'll switch from the name brand to the store brands. Maybe I'll downshift some of my expectations. If I don't have enough to go around, I'll figure out how to make things work. And it's that resilience that we're starting to see reflected in not just consumers using credit, but how they're performing on the credit they have. Are they able to make their payments on all their bills on time? And we're starting to see that stabilize as well. So I really think this is a case of consumers are starting to figure things out. And I think that's a really, like I said, a good sign of consumer resilience.
Yeah, that's a great sign if that's what you guys are seeing. With the minimum payments, are you seeing any positive move towards paying more than the minimum payment, trying to really pay down that high interest rate debt?
We are seeing, and to be fair, there's a lot of seasonality in credit card debt, right?
Sure,
Every year we see the fourth quarter tends to be this big blip as consumers really turn to credit cards to pay for a lot of, shopping around the holidays, buying presents for the kids, putting nice meals on the table. We all go on a little bit of a spending binge at year end, but the consumers tend to pay that down in the first and second quarter as they're getting maybe some year end bonuses from work. More likely they're getting tax rebates, government money back from the IRS, and they're putting that toward their credit cards. It happens every year. We expect to continue to see that, but the amount of debt increase that we saw in the fourth quarter this year, it was still up over the third quarter, but the percentage jump looks like it's going to be a little less than it was before. So people are relying less on their credit cards, and like you said, maybe even putting a little bit more than the minimums when they can to paying those down, because 24-25% interest rate on credit cards, man, you pay the minimums and you're going to be paying for that 2024 holiday spending for quite some time.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about interest rates, because they're more than a little bit problematic at this point. I saw a discount tire card with 34%, saw a Nordstrom's card with 31%. And then just your normal cards, you're seeing as high as 29%. I mean, there's got to come a point where there's kind of that line in the sand. And what do you see for the future of interest rates? Because with the Fed cutting rates and going through their process, it just doesn't seem like credit card rates have really budged. It seems like they've been going up instead.
It doesn't feel that way for a lot of consumers. Because they're still, even if it's 23 versus 24%, you're not feeling any relief. But the reality is that when the Fed started lowering rates last year, and we did see 3 rate cuts that took place, 75 basis points, which again is not not going to make anybody feel like they have a windfall. But when the Fed cuts interest rates, those get directly flowed through to the interest rate that a consumer pays. So, just about every credit card is based on the bank's prime lending rate. That prime lending rate is based on the Fed funds rate. So a lot of consumers that had a 24% interest on their card, for instance, maybe paying now closer to 23%. Like I said, not going to basically be a big source of relief for consumers, but the good news is it's not getting worse. But what does happen is that a lot of consumers, when they open new credit cards, that interest rate is based on, in many cases, what the consumer's risk profile looks like. And so a consumer that's had a card in their wallet they've taken care of may have a decent interest rate, but you know what? If they've been late on some other payments, if they've really been building their balances and their credit score has gone down, a new card they open may be more expensive than the card that they already had. And so that may be as well contributing to some consumers saying, wow, I opened up a new, like you said, Nordstrom card because I wanted to take advantage of the Nordstrom benefits. But wow, that's a really high interest rate if I don't pay it off in full every month. And that's where, the pithy answer is, whenever possible, pay your credit cards off in full, and you don't incur an interest fee on that. Now, the reality is that a lot of consumers do need to carry a balance on their credit card. They're using their credit card because they don't have the cash to pay that off. But the more you can get your balances down, the less interest you're going to pay, and the more of your money that can go towards actually, the thing that you're buying, and not the interest on the thing that you're buying.
You were talking about the opening up a new card. We talk about that all the time on the program because the terms and conditions probably are about the same, but there could be a definite difference in interest rates long term. What do credit card companies? I've always wondered this. Do they assess that risk profile at the beginning of the card or at month 12 when the 0% interest goes away?
So typically when they set the terms, the interest rate that you're going to pay, the spread over that prime rate, is going to be based on your credit profile at the time that you open the card. So if you've got a 680 credit score, they will give you an interest rate and set that interest rate even after that, the early, the teaser rate or the introductory rate. They'll set that when you open the card. But it doesn't mean that if your credit score improves, that you might not be able to get a better rate from them. And so in many cases, a credit card issuer will look at you from time to time. They'll do what they call a portfolio review. They'll look at your credit score. They'll look at your overall credit standing. And they may not necessarily give you a much lower rate, but in many cases they'll look to say, hey, your credit profile has improved over time. We want to give you more of a credit limit, and we want to, increase your credit limit, A, to help you spend, but also B, we'd like to capture more of that spend on our card. And in some cases, that actually really helps consumers because a higher credit limit can help your utilization rate, that percentage of balance compared to your total limits. And when your utilization rate is lower, that actually helps your credit score. So that's actually something that can help you. It's a virtuous cycle. Get a credit limit increase on your existing cards. Your utilization rate goes down. Maybe your score improves, and then you can qualify for even a better rate or a better card offer.
I'm glad that you brought that up because it is so true. And the benefit of staying on time, maybe even paying more than the minimum payment, is that they will turn around and say reward you with could reward you with a higher credit rate, credit limits, and what a bonus that can be for your score.
It really does. It helps a lot, and to be honest, it gives you some flexibility too. If something happens, we always talk about consumers, having that access to emergency funds. If your car needs a repair or the hot water heater in your house gives out, you want to be able to put your hands on, $400 or $500, $1,000, so that these emergencies don't make you fall behind. Well, having availability on your credit card is sometimes a good safety net to have as well, just to make sure that, again, those unexpected expenses don't make you fall behind on other payments and start getting into a bad place. So getting that credit limit increases really can give you a lot of flexibility that helps when both in good times and bad.
Charlie, does it seem like 2025 is kind of the line in the sand? Either consumers get a whole lot better or maybe they get it a lot worse. To me, it just kind of feels like that line in the sand moment.
I'd call it, a line in the sand. It does feel like we've kind of hit something of an inflection point where the the increase in debt, the increase in delinquencies that we've been seeing over the last few years it looks like they're really starting to stabilize. The challenge that we face when we look at the consumer overall is that, overall means on average, and there's a lot of variation from those averages that we see. And we see that there's a lot of consumers, particularly higher income consumers, those with some financial cushion, who are frankly doing really well. They're still sitting on a lot of equity in their homes, a lot of wealth in the stock market, and a lot of consumers that are feeling the benefits of that wealth and are spending. It's really what's been driving a lot of our economy. I also acknowledge, and we see that there's consumers, there's a segment of consumers that really have been and do feel left behind. Lower income consumers in particular that feel like that a lot of these benefits of higher home prices, higher stock market, well, that didn't really help them so much at all. They're renting. They don't have any money in the stock market, and everything that they spend the majority of their monthly income on, groceries, gas, rent, childcare, insurance, just keeps getting more and more expensive. And for a lot of those consumers, they are struggling very much. And, I think that that's something that we're starting to see. That's been a big driver behind a lot of the growth in the use of credit and more consumers struggling to keep on-time payments. But we're really hoping that as we go into 2025, that more of those consumers will start to see that stabilization as well, that the job market will continue to be in a stable situation, that it absorbs some of those people that may be, in a more transitional situation, and the consumers can get a little more certainty around the cost of living going forward. They're not going to be seeing double-digit inflation on some of the things they need to spend it on. And again, they can start making those plans to get themselves out in front of, as opposed to behind, their monthly expenses.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. I'm talking to Charlie Wise. He's with TransUnion, and if you want to go check out some great consumer resources, go to www.transunion.com. Let's talk a little bit about personal loans. That seems to be a category of consumer debt that's really gone up quite a bit here in the last couple of years. I'd always heard that a consumer loan versus a credit card balance, that the consumer loan has a better effect on the credit score than a credit card balance. Is that true or not?
It in some ways does, for some obvious reasons and maybe some less obvious reasons. So first off, any debt shows, any credit card, any personal loan, any mortgage balance shows up as a balance in your credit report. But not all balances are treated the same when it comes to calculating your credit score. So when you look at the key factors that drive credit score, on-time payments for sure is top of that list. Make your payments on time, it'll help your credit score. Miss payments, and your credit score is likely to take a hit. The second most important is that utilization rate on your revolving accounts, and credit cards are the most common by far revolving account. So the higher balance you carry on your credit card, the higher your utilization rate is going to be, and that is going to potentially cause a hit to your credit score, particularly if you carry a relatively high utilization rate, 50, 60, 70%. You really want to keep that utilization rate down below 30% is a good target, and below 10% if you can is ideal. That same balance calculation doesn't necessarily apply when you have unsecured personal loan balances. It's not a revolving account. It's what we call an installment account. You borrow the money and you pay it down over time. You can't run it up and down. And so what that means is there's benefits to that, which is a $1,000 balance in your credit card may be treated differently as a $1,000 balance on your revolving account. But the other benefit to unsecured personal loans is that a lot of consumers use those to pay down their credit card balances. It's something that, again, is treated well when you look at your credit score, but also they tend to be much less expensive from an interest rate perspective. So, if your rate is 25% on your credit card, many times you can find interest rate on a personal loan at more like the 15 to 18%, and that can save you some real money when it comes to interest over the life of paying down that loan. And so we do recommend, in many cases, for consumers that have higher credit card balances, take out an unsecured personal loan, use the proceeds to pay down your credit card, and then try to keep those credit card balances down. Not great to go take out a personal loan, run your credit card balance way back up where it was before, and then you're stuck with both loans. But if you can pay that down, you can save yourself some real money, and in a couple of years, that debt's gone when you paid it off.
Yeah, that's great information. I guess that if you had to pick one metric and say this is the one that we focus on when it comes to the overall health of the consumer, would it be delinquencies? Or you mentioned that a second ago, or would it be something else?
Yep. Yeah, it really is delinquencies, and that's what we look at very closely in terms of how is the consumer doing. So as I mentioned, we had seen delinquencies on credit cards increase significantly from the troughs that we saw really around the pandemic time. The overall percentage of consumers that were delinquent on a credit card back in 2020 was 1.3%. So of everybody holding a credit card, 1.3% of them were 3 payments or more behind on at least one credit card. That 1.3% was up to about 2.6% at the end of 2024. So it's just about doubled over that time. Now, it's still, lower, a lot lower than it was back in, the 2008, 2009 time frame around the great financial crisis, but it has gone up a lot, and that really is just evidence that there are consumers out there who are struggling on their debts, and credit cards do tend to carry some of the highest delinquency rates because it's something that most consumers, if you're going to have any type of credit, they have, and they're much more likely to take care of their mortgage or their auto loan because they're protecting their homes and their vehicles by doing that and let their credit cards go when they're having difficulty. So it is a sign that consumers have been struggling, but the good news is that we have seen that delinquency on credit cards stabilized and hasn't been increasing over the past year the way it did before, and we're expecting it to stay stable in the year ahead, if not start to drop a little bit.
So would the financial crisis, would that probably have been the highest delinquency rates we've seen in this country?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you what they looked like during the Great Depression. We
Yeah, right. No discount tire to go get your new tires on your buggy.
Exactly, but in modern times, yeah, that was as high as we've seen, certainly going back several decades.
What approximately?
But it was also
was
a
that
very
number?
messed up time, let me tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you recall what that delinquency rate roughly was?
It was, I believe, more the neighborhood of 3 to 4%. I'd had to go back and verify some of those numbers, but it was quite high. The other thing that you saw back then was, in many cases, consumers that had mortgages, those mortgage delinquency rates, which are now down in the 1% range, they were over 7% back in the 2009, 2010 time frame. And that's because a lot of consumers that had mortgages, those mortgages were deeply underwater. They bought homes where the prices were significantly inflated. The home prices dropped, and consumers that were sitting on a $300,000 mortgage for a property with an assessed value of $150,000, they just walked away from those mortgages in many cases. And that's where we saw these eye-popping numbers in terms of mortgage delinquencies. So that's something we also have been tracking. What are we seeing in terms of mortgage delinquencies? And we're still in the low 1% range for for mortgage delinquencies now. Consumers are very much taking care of their homes and their mortgages, and those mortgage delinquencies are at very controlled levels.
Well, Charlie, as always, just great information, and appreciate you coming on the program. Once again, you can get more information about TransUnion at transunion.com. Charlie, catch you next time.
Thank you so much, Bob. Take care.
Take care.
Take care.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. A lot of great information, and some of that I'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow, or not, maybe next week. We got guests tomorrow. But anyway, it's great information. TransUnion.com. Well, if you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.